that Medicaid is a state and federal program, and not a single person will lose Medicaid coverage unless their state makes that choice. Mr. Chairman, this resolution has my full support, and I encourage my colleagues to vote for it, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I would remind the gentleman that this big, beautiful bill for billionaires would put 820,000 people in Arkansas at risk of losing Medicaid. Now, Mr. Chair, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the Democratic leader of the House, and my friend, Mr. Jeffries.
Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the reckless Republican budget, which is a betrayal of working-class Americans, middle-class Americans, children, seniors, and everyday Americans all across the country. I thank the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, Brendan Boyle, for his leadership, all of the members of the Budget Committee, all of the members of the House Democratic Caucus who are standing up for the American people by opposing this reckless Republican budget that will devastate people all across the land. It's not consistent with promises that were made to the American people. It's the exact opposite. Here's the promise that was made to the American people over and over and over again, that Republicans were going to drive down the high cost of living in the United States of America and combat inflation. That was the promise that you made to the American people. As House Democrats, we're working hard to lower housing costs, lower grocery costs, lower insurance costs, lower utility costs, and lower child care costs because we know America is too expensive. We want to drive down the high cost of living. But on the other side of the aisle, we haven't seen a single bill introduced by Republicans to drive down the high cost of living, address the affordability crisis in the United States of America. Not a single executive order issued by President Trump has anything to do with driving down the high cost of living. Not a single administrative action taken this year by the Trump administration has anything to do with driving down the high cost of living. In fact, costs aren't going down in the United States of America. Costs are going up. Grocery prices are going up. Inflation is going up. Republicans are crashing the economy in real time. So you've betrayed the American middle class, working families, everyday Americans, children and seniors with this $4.5 trillion budget scheme. And don't come to the House floor and act like this was being done in the name of fiscal responsibility. Enough with that narrative. There's nothing in the Republican track record to suggest to the American people that you are the party of fiscal responsibility. Absolutely nothing. President Reagan comes into office. His signature legislative accomplishment is a massive unpaid for tax cut for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. And what does it do? Increases the debt by $2 trillion. That's not fiscal responsibility. That's recklessness. That's your record. Those kind of fiscal policies continued for 8 years, carried over into the presidency of George H.W. Bush. And then we see a massive debt handed over to President Bill Clinton. What do Democrats do with that massive debt? We turn that debt into a surplus over an 8-year period of time, and the economy exploded. That's what fiscal responsibility looks like. That happened under President Bill Clinton. Stop saying to the American people that you're the party of fiscal responsibility. The facts say exactly the opposite. And so a budget surplus is handed over to President George W. Bush, who proceeds in 2001 and then again in 2003 to pass massive tax cuts, same playbook, here we go again, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected that explode the debt by $8 trillion. And at the same time, we have a failed war in Iraq and a failed war in Afghanistan. Over time, adding another $8 trillion to our nation's debt. That burden is handed over to President Barack Obama, who during the period of his time in office, when he had a $1.5 trillion deficit, cuts it by $1 trillion, despite the fact that he also inherited from Republicans the Great Recession and had to turn things around. So he cuts the deficit by $1 trillion, from $1.5 trillion to $500 billion. You asked about numbers? Here are the numbers. And then that gets handed over to President Trump in his first term, who proceeds, of course, to follow the same Republican playbook. Has nothing to do with fiscal responsibility and everything to do with massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. And so Republicans passed the GOP tax scam, 83% of the benefits set aside for the wealthiest 1%. And in connection with the GOP tax scam, explode the debt by another $2 trillion that you force working families, middle-class folks, and everyday Americans to pay for. Republicans are not the party of fiscal responsibility. Stop trying to convince the American people otherwise. Same playbook. In fact, during the administration of Donald Trump, during his first 4 years, the debt exploded to such a degree that 25% or so of our nation's debt came from just the first term of President Donald Trump. 25%. We've been around for over 248 years. The party of fiscal responsibility. And then, of course, President Biden inherits a significant deficit, overwhelming debt in his 2 years. First 2 years gets a lot done and cuts the deficit by $1.7 trillion. There's still a lot of work for all of us to do. But do not pretend that any of this, that this budget resolution has anything to do with fiscal responsibility or keeping your promises to the American people. You promised to lower the high cost of living, have done nothing about it. And so, here we are again. There you go again with this GOP tax scam. Same exact playbook. $4.5 trillion worth of cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected disproportionately to benefit billionaire donors and well-connected corporations. To make matters worse, you would actually cut programs, cut the social safety net, cut the things that matter to working-class Americans, middle-class Americans, young people, seniors, and others, including up to, if not more, $880 billion of cuts to Medicaid. That's the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. That doesn't help working-class Americans, doesn't help middle-class Americans, doesn't help children, doesn't help older Americans. It will devastate them. Devastate children, devastate people with disabilities, devastate seniors, devastate pregnant women all across the country, devastate nursing homes, shut down hospitals, including in rural America, in urban America, in small-town America, in the heartland of America. That's what the Republican budget betrayal is all about. Devastate supplemental nutritional assistance programs for our children, for our veterans, for our families. That's what the Republican budget is all about. Has nothing to do with making life better for everyday Americans. It will hurt everyday Americans. So Democrats are not going to provide this reckless Republican scheme, this out-of-control budget, a single vote, not a single vote, because we're standing on the side of the American people. We will fight this reckless Republican budget today. We will fight this reckless Republican budget tomorrow. We will fight this reckless Republican budget until it's buried deep in the ground, never to rise again, and stand on the side of the American people at all times. Vote no.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves his time. Gentleman from Texas.